how aware were you of the true story before you read the script? Did you do any research into the story, or just base everything off the script?
So basically, man, I was just kind of walking around and trying to find like what film I was going to do, and I was handed this screenplay by Vincent Siricione, and I don't know, I read the screenplay on a plane going from Sacramento to LA, and when I landed, I just said, this is pretty incredible. And I'm like a huge fan of like genre movies. So if it's a thriller, if it's a horror, I love it. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh man, like how do you keep an audience captive? When I read it originally, man, being very truthful with you, when I first read it, I thought like, to be it's an interesting genre type piece. But when I really started thinking about the screenplay, I started thinking about how real the story was and how gritty the story was and how it touched me in a lot of different ways. And I just started really filling out like the characters and saying like, man, I know this guy. And I knew him, not Tully, but I know who that is.
Right.
And then I knew who that family was. And I knew who Mr. Walker was, and I knew, my family is dysfunctional. You know what I mean? And 95% of the people that I know, they have dysfunctional black families. So it teared away at me mentally that way, and that's when I said I'm going to do the movie. So after reading the screenplay, my first thing was to actually go sit down with the family, and talk to them about what had happened, and because I wanted to know if it was real, right? I wanted to really know, like, man, did this all happen? And when I heard like, yes, and more, that's when I said, this is an amazing story, and that's when I signed up and was like, hey, look, I don't know, I'm not anybody. I don't have no manager, no agent. I'm just raw and rough, but I think this is an incredible story. And I asked them would they allow me to tell it, and they were like, yeah, and they went for the ride for me, and and then I just went out, and that was probably the hardest part, was going out and trying to find someone to give me the money. But that was very tough, because it was like, how do you make a movie? How do you pitch, I'm gonna make a movie about a white supremacist who kills a black cop, takes a black house hostage, and then goes back to prison? Like, it's like,
no happy ending there.
Yeah, it's like, who wants to see that? Yeah, I read this script and I said, wow, man, like who would be great for this part? And this is how I knew it was right, because when I read it, I said it's Danny Glover.
That was first choice?
That was my first choice. Now, after saying that,
how do you go ahead and get Danny? Now you want Danny Glover.
This is, yeah, dude, this is the part where I think all independent filmmakers in the world, and independent, whatever it is you do, you have to hustle. So this is when I said, well, I'd have a connect to Danny Glover. I knew Danny through his brother, Martin Glover. This is a long shot, right?
Sure.
So I call him and tell him I have this thing, and he's like, well, D, man. And I said, please, man, just if you could just let me speak to him. Let's call it agent. I said, no. I said, because there's no way in the world, I would never make it, right? So I end up getting on the phone with Danny Glover. And I was like nervous and I'm shaking, and I had never asked Danny for anything, and I just pitched him the story, man. I said, look, in same exact way, like I'm trying, I don't have very much at all. As a matter of fact, we have this much for the budget. I said, if you want to tell me no now, it's fine, but I just want you to hear what it's about. And when I finished telling him the story, his exact words back to me was, oh, baby, I know that story. And I said, oh, what? And he lives in Berkeley, right? And this, he knew the story, he had heard about it. And he was like, yeah, man. Young fella get out of jail, kill the cop, and run. I remember that story. He starts kind of regurgitating it and in his, in his way, because he's trying to remember. And he was like, send me the script. Anyways, I give him the script. He waits a week. He reads it. He comes back to me. He says, I want to do the movie. And I just remember like hanging up the phone, and I was just so excited. I was just excited, man. And I was more excited about the opportunity to work with him, but I was more excited about what he meant to the project.
Which is what? Which is
when I was dealing with the writing of Supremacy and I was dealing with getting ready to make the movie, Danny meant foundation for me independently, right? It wasn't just like, oh, it's a known face, right? That's not what I was thinking. I was thinking like, if you think about Danny and how active he's been in civil rights, how active he's been in community, how active he's been in molding youth that have went astray, right? He was like, for this movie and for what I was trying to shoot, he was perfect. When you think about Hollywood and how we treat our legends, it's not always right, right? So we let these guys who come and they come in and they grace the screen for years, then they get a little older and we say, okay, move over there, it's time for, you know, the young, hot, whoever that is. For me, I think about Danny and Danny to me represents why Will Smith is here, why Jamie Foxx is here, why Forrest Whitaker is here, Denzel is here, right? They were not giving Oscars out to black actors when he made The Color Purple,
Sure.
right? Sidney Poitier opened the door. Danny was one of the guys who came through the door and graced the screen for many years. He was the first guy that I seen in a huge action movie, Predator 2, right? Where I was like, whoa, like, dang, like it was Danny Glover, like, you know what I mean? And it was kind of like, in Predator, that's one of my favorite movies. And it was interesting, right? But he broke that.
Because he's not the sidekick.
No, he was the lead.
And it didn't matter what color he was.
It didn't matter. And then Lethal Weapon, right? It was like that franchise. How could you not know Lethal Weapon? Mm-hmm. And too old for this shit, Riggs. Like, right? Like you think about all of that, and then when I look at him, I go, man, like, what type of bridges did he have to cross in his career to get to for me to see him on that screen, right? And when we got on the set of Supremacy, it was like I knew God was working with me, man, for me to have him. It didn't matter that I didn't have Matt Damon playing Tully and all that. I just wanted to make a raw-ass movie with a deep message, and I knew I had somebody in the foxhole that knew that. His process was very unique. Oftentimes for me with the material and the script and how loose it is in terms of like the words, like we had to really, I personally had to be very cautious with Joe, with Danny. So oftentimes I would run the lines with Danny before we ran the scene to make sure he was okay with what was going to come at him. Mm. And he would oftentimes tell me if it was too much. He would tell me, too much, right? And then I would know, okay, Joe, we got to pull back.
Because
right?
He had a sense of the character, he had a sense of the...
Yeah, but at the same time, he also would know...
if it would be too much for an audience.
Not that, too much for him.
Personally.
Personally.
Okay.
Right? So you're talking about someone who's 70.
Right.
Who's lived through this.
Yeah.
So coming to work is great, telling the story is great, but these words hurt, man. Like, you know, and it hurt, like a lot of times when I'm shooting a film, it was very hard to see a man wave a gun on camera and scream, get on the ground nigger to a boy, a little kid, a baby. You know, after 3 or 4 days of that, you start going like, hey, you know, it's not funny. Like, it's like, all right, man, let's get that part done and get out of here. And Danny was great because he became like the meter.
The barometer.
Yeah, and he would let me know like, hey, let's pull up on this. That's a little bit too much. And then it got to the point to where we got into a rhythm where I would see it in his face. The last scene of the movie was interesting because there was a lot of like racial slurs that were flying at the very end of the film. And then we went into this kind of like this conversation between Joe and Danny, and it didn't work. And the writer and everybody was on set, and I had been writing on the script, like I'm just rewriting the script as we're working. And I remember saying, this doesn't work. Like, and Danny, I could tell in Danny's face it didn't work. So I cut the power, told everybody go home for 3 hours or whatever the hell they need to do. And it was like one of the days where if we don't make the day, we won't finish the movie. Mm-hmm. And we rewrote that scene on the day. Danny, myself, Joe, and the writer at the kitchen table in there, and we wrote that. And I just had these words that came to me, and to this day, I'm just so happy that happened, and we shot that in. But yeah, he was great.
It's an extraordinary film.
Man, I'm so happy you watched it and you liked it, man.
Congratulations to you.
Thank you.
I hope to see more great films from you in the future.
Yeah, man, we're gonna try hard, man.
Awesome.
Thank you
Yeah,
so
thank
much,
you so
man.
much.
Pleasure
Thanks for
to meet
taking
you.
the time with me.
Yeah.